Hi, this is Dave Schwensen, author of The Beatles at Shea Stadium, and you're listening to the Fab4Free4All.
The Fab4Free4All, a radio talk show on the internet. And joining me today, as always...
Who are you?
Oh, I am the moderator, Rob Leonard. And joining me today is Mitch Axelrod.
How you doing, folks?
And Tony Triguardo.
Howdy.
And today we're going to do something we haven't touched in a while, and that's the American albums. And we're going to focus specifically on the Beatles' second album.
Second?
Well... for Capitol Records.
Okay.
See,
Being
that's
technical here.
Yeah, that's the trick with Capitol. They didn't identify VJs introducing the Beatles as anything.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
So we're going to talk about the Beatles' second album, which was a hodgepodge of tracks, forthcoming tracks, previously released tracks, and it's one thing we're sure of. It's a rock and roll album.
Yeah, it's up-tempo, baby.
There are no ballads, basically, in this.
No, there was no Till There Was You on this.
No.
This one really rocks.
This is, to me, if you think of all the Capitol compilations, we'll call them, what else are you going to call them? This one has gained in my favor over the years.
This was always one of my all-time favorites.
Even though some of the mixing is different. But
we didn't know that back then.
We didn't know that back then.
I got this originally in 64. I didn't really get into it till about 67 or 8. But when I played it, to me, I know this is going to sound weird, but it's the equivalent of Paul's Run Devil Run. And I know you're going to say, what?
I know exactly. I know
you know
exactly
where I'm going? Paul's Run Devil Run starts off, and I know it does have like No Other Baby and stuff, but for the most part, if you have a rapid heartbeat, don't listen to Run Devil Run, because it just goes and it doesn't stop. It like pedal to the metal.
It's right out of the chute.
And that's to me, that's what happens with this album. I think
this album is even more than Run Devil Run, because Run Devil Run has Movie Mag, which is a very country-esque Carl Perkins song.
Right.
And
Movie Mag?
Yeah, Movie Mag's on Run Devil Run.
Oh. And it's got a country twang to it.
Yeah.
But that's okay. So, but it's still an up, an up rocker.
Very much.
This one I just think bangs you over the head.
This is you hit the gas pedal and you don't stop.
No, you don't stop until 22 minutes.
It's more than 22 minutes.
I think it's 22 minutes, my friend.
It'll tell you it's 27:30. We're wrong.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's 27 minutes. That extra 5.
I have to be honest. I thought it was 22 also.
Well, by the time you put it in and you get out of your driveway, it's over.
It's over. I remember when I was young, this was one of the first catalog albums that I got after 62 to 66 and 67, 70. I think, I had Pepper, Meet the Beatles, and then 62 to 66, 67, 70, and then this one. And this was one that I just kept turning over and over and over again, because when you're 8, 9 years old, and you're starting off side one with Roll Over Beethoven, and George's guitar lick that just transcendent, and you're starting off the other side with Paul screaming, "I'm on telling Mary," you're like, you're in rock and roll heaven, really, as a kid.
It's interesting that both sides are covers of the kickoff track.
Yes. Oh, we'll get into that, because, it's funny, because all you people in the UK, and you know who you are, because you say color with a U. When you spell color with a U, you don't say color. Yes, you say color. Excuse me, we're from New York. Flavor. Yeah. No, but for all you people in the UK, you had to wait like 9 months between the first 2 albums of the Beatles. Us people here in America, we had 3 months.
If that.
I mean, Capitol was like, hey, ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching. And they said, wow, them Beatle boys doing well.
Well, Capitol was basically saying, how many people watch these guys on Ed Sullivan? They saw how every one of them want to come out and buy a record.
Saw how much Meet the Beatles here in America was selling.
Absolutely.
But the only thing is, they did get a little smart. And when I say smart, they got money hungry.
Right.
And they said, you know what? The first time, though, there were 5 tracks that were, quote, leftovers on this one. But the first time Meet the Beatles didn't have the leftovers from Please Please Me. So this time they said, we're wrong. We should definitely do that. We should put everything out now because the Beatles are the Beatles. And they put on those 5 leftover tracks from With the Beatles on this. So they knew what they were doing, but in typical Capitol fashion. And again, we didn't even know this until later on because the UK albums were not available to us in America till much later.
Right.
But Capitol decided to save money because Capitol paid a mechanical fee of about 2 cents per song.
Right.
So they figured, you know what? The Beatles are the Beatles. They're going to sell like crazy. We can actually save money if we only make it 11 or 12 tracks instead of the 14.
Right.
Because if you think about it, 2 cents per song, $20,000 per million copies. The Beatles were selling 3 to 5 million and Meet the Beatles. Now how much they can save on paying fees and still make a ton of money?
Part of it was also the fact that, hey, we got to save up. They weren't going to match the British albums. That was not something they did until Sgt. Pepper. Revolver was the closest thing before the contract change.
But, I do have to ask this, and I may have posed this before on the show, and I still, at some point, I'm going to do the math, and if it comes out the way I think it might, I'm going to probably put up the results on the website. But I still have to wonder, if you take how many albums came out in the UK, you add to it how many singles you would have to buy, because, again, the Beatles, like many artists, didn't want to put the B-sides of their 45s on the albums. They want the 45 to be something exclusive. Even the A-sides are not on the albums in many instances.
No.
So I have to wonder, if you took how many albums the Beatles had in the UK, add in the cost for a fan of each of the 45s, add in the cost of the EPs that had tracks that were not on the albums, if you do that math and you take the fact that before Sgt. Pepper, the Beatles had how many UK albums versus how many American albums, if you did the math and added it all up, would the American fans really not be spending that much more, if any more money than the UK
It depends
fans
if they
did
bought the single and the album. That's the thing.
But that's what I mean. In other words,
they probably did.
If you had a Beatle collector in the UK and the US that wanted to own every song the Beatles had put out up to a certain point, would the UK fan really have been spending?
That's a good
Capitol
point.
was greedy. There's no two ways about it. But when you look at the greed factor there of Capitol, Capitol did compile. So if an album, you could buy an album on sale for the equivalent of $1.98 or $2 in a store, were you getting a deal compared to, even if you took the same monetary values for the UK, were the UK fans actually spending more? Because the truth is, for this one in particular, for Beatles' second album, you had to go out and buy the Long Tall Sally EP to get that material.
Yeah,
which
that was more specifically for the EP market.
The Stones did a couple of those where it was basically a standalone EP of 4 rockin' oldies. Here it is.
But you know what? On this album, for the very first time, the Americans got something before the British got something.
Right.
And that was Long Tall Sally and I Call Your Name.
Right.
So, I mean, and it happened 2 other times later on.
Yeah.
But, that was an instance where EMI was so happy that Capitol wanted more stuff, and they rushed it out because it wasn't going to be used, on the Hard Day's Night soundtrack.
Yeah, they sent them to.
They sent them to George. George Martin did it, sent them, and boom, we got them before the Brits.
Right.
So I don't know. We'd have to come up with a point in time to figure that out.
But
I would say if you took everything up to Sgt. Pepper and you just
what you just brought up, Tony. If you look at Meet the Beatles, there's only "I Want to Hold Your Hand," and I saw her standing there as the only single on there. On this record, if you look at, there's not even a Capitol single on here.
No.
She Loves You was on Swan. Roll Over Beethoven came from Capital of Canada, because that's how much the Beatles were selling, that an import could go to number 68 on the Billboard chart.
Well, funny you should say that, Rob, because the cover itself mentions, and I always thought it was weird that it said She Loves You and Roll Over Beethoven, especially Roll Over Beethoven. I understand now monetarily why they did it, because Capital of Canada put it out. And Swan really only licensed the song themselves, but Capitol still owned it.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So that's why they're really 2 Capitol products, and they were pushing it. And as we'll see when we go through the whole album, Roll Over Beethoven was their opener for American concerts.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Which is,
and like Rob said, Capital of Canada put it out. It went way up the charts, and they figured, you know what? We're going to let people know that it's Capitol, and now it's out.
Because this was the first time She Loves You was on a record. Swan didn't put it out on a record.
Right.
There was no compilation album. They weren't contractually allowed to put out anything except for the 45.
Now, oddly enough, the weird thing is that if you look at Capital of Canada, they actually released this Beatles second album with the same track list, but because it was weird and they had released with the Beatles as Beatlemania, they pretty much released the first UK album as Twist and Shout. This was now really the third Canadian Capitol album, so they couldn't call it Beatles second album, so they named it Long Tall Sally, and then the irony being that having had the hit with Roll Over Beethoven in Canada, they didn't even put the featuring Roll Over Beethoven on the cover of the Canadian album.
I don't think they needed to.
I guess not.
I think Capitol put it on here because it was on Capitol. But I think it was partly for Capitol, so they know, we have She Loves You on and Roll Over Beethoven. Okay.
That's right. I think we definitely need to say that the title was a dig at
the introducing the Beatles
at VJ, because they were in a lawsuit with Capitol now to see who really owned the Beatles stuff. VJ had the album out, but this was the second Capitol album, even though it was the Beatles' third album actually out. But they kept saying it's the Beatles' second album, so it was a dig at them.
Well, it was that goal to try to
say
make
Capitol's
sure this is
the
official.
only right. It was official,
the official
and Capitol's
second
the
album.
only one that has the Beatles. I mean, even all of the promotional stuff still had the Beatles on Capitol.
But part of it was part of that lawsuit, because if let's say they called it the Beatles' third album, that would have acknowledged introducing the Beatles as a legitimate record, and the lawsuit that was going back and forth at the time. VJ could have said, well, look, even Capitol says we're a legitimate album.
Yeah.
Right.
So that was part of it, too.
Right. So I guess in Canada, it's true, they couldn't just change it to the Beatles' third album because it was still Capital of Canada. That would have still confused the issue. So. The funny part of it for me is that you touched on it a little bit, Rob, about the differences. But before I had with the Beatles, which is where a lot of these tracks would have been derived from, I actually owned the Long Tall Sally EP. So for me, I heard those sonic differences, and they kind of like freaked me out. The differences in money in particular between the EP version, the mono EP version, and the mono or stereo album version. It's just dramatically different sounding, with all the echo and all that.
Well, money has, the unique Capitol echo, not anywhere else.
Yeah, but those tracks all just sounded so different on the EP. And so much cleaner. And then
what EP?
The Long Tall Sally.
Well, Money wasn't on the Long Tall Sally one.
Oh, I'm so sorry. You're right. It was on the All My Loving EP.
But I mentioned before the tracks that were quote leftovers. 5 of the 6 were cover songs, and originally Capitol thought that former American R&B stuff, when sung by a British band, wouldn't go over well. But now this time again, I guess when it comes to making money, and it's the Beatles, all that other stuff went right out the window. It didn't matter.
And if you think about it, Chuck Berry is 57. Well, Long Tall Sally is 57 or some 56. Mm-hmm. I mean, these songs are not that old if you think about it.
But old in the music industry.
Yeah, and think about it. Songs that are 6 years old now are ancient history, essentially. Maybe rock and roll was younger and there was less of it.
Maybe.
But if you think about it too, you had these clowns, and we'll talk about him in detail, I'm sure, but you have these clowns like Dave Dexter.
I'm not so sure we want to say clown, only because he was given a job to do, and he created unique mixes.
But he didn't
But if you read about him as a person, and you read about the arrogance involved in what he did, and that he didn't do it professionally, he did it with a horrific bias.
Then that's
toward the material.
He's also a snobby jazz fan.
He's a snobby jazz fan, and he really was. I mean, I'm going to run with Dave Marsh with this one. He really was a jerk.
Okay.
Really, when you came right down to it.
Why don't you say Dave Marsh's book?
Oh, yeah. Dave Marsh wrote a book a few years ago called The Beatles Second Album. Rodale Press, I think, is shut down at this point, I'm fairly sure, but the book is still available in many, many places. And it's a fun read. I will be honest with you. Half of the book is about Dave Dexter.
Yes.
So it really becomes...
When I read that book, just going on a side note here, there was so much anger at Dave Dexter that sometimes you have to put the book down and say, I got to come back to it later.
Because it's so off topic that the book could have been called Dave Dexter and the Beatles Second Album.
But Dave Marsh hates Dave Dexter.
Yeah, but it is true how much Dexter changed the music and really changed the feel. But the only thing I guess I can say is that somewhere either in his subconscious or somewhere, like you said, maybe it was just ka-ching, but he had to somehow acknowledge the fact that now at this point the Beatles were taking these R&B songs and were Beatlizing them.
Which is the best way to describe it.
You know, you take Devil in Her Heart, and it's a Beatles. It's not the original. It's, you know,
the Donays.
The Donays, who knows who they are now. But you know what, though?
Wonder of, you know.
There were a lot of bands that the Beatles, you know, thank goodness for these bands, because I'm sure they made a lot of money when the Beatles then Beatlized them and put them out.
Yeah, Richard Drapkin's family is living quite comfortably, probably, thanks to like, Devil in Her Heart.
Yeah.
We should say he's a songwriter.
The songwriter,
yeah. He's a songwriter. But I mean,
who?
You know, Dexter's, for those of you in the UK and other parts of the world that didn't get these...
As your first editions. So.
Yeah, because you might have gotten them later. But originally, these things were so, I'm going to say, Dexterized, because the reverb and the echo on them almost made them sometimes unlistenable. Well, not these.
I think out of all the ones, I think this is the worst one, I think.
Well, it depends on, you know, this is the way we grew up loving them.
Right.
So when we first heard them, at least, again, in the first generation fan, when I first heard them, this was the definitive version to me. So let's just say go further. Even Roll Over Beethoven. When you hear that with the echo.
Oh my God! It's like there's two guitars playing it. The echo is so strong.
But there's also if you listen with headphones,
it's a live feel.
Yeah,
that's what they were going for.
But if you listen, you could literally hear them sliding the pot up.
Yes,
you could. I mean, it wasn't even thought like let's make this subtle. It was like, oh, it started. Okay, let me put the slide up as it's going.
But my point being that that's the version I knew. So when I heard it later, clean, I didn't know what to think.
It almost felt unexciting for a few seconds.
Well, the same thing to me happened with things like She's a Woman and I Feel Fine. I mean, if you listen to those, I know it's not on this album, but when you listen to I Feel Fine and She's a Woman, especially She's a Woman.
Yeah, we'll be honest. That's the one exception I'll make of the entire U.S. catalog is I enjoy
Sometimes you need that.
Yep.
Because that's how we heard it on the radio. And then when you heard it clean, especially She's a Woman, it sounds too clean. And I'm not saying it's bad.
No, but I'm going to say that definitely you're right. That's the one exception I'll absolutely give to is that She's a Woman, the American version, I've always enjoyed more than the straight, clean UK.
Because it sounded almost like sterile.
It is a little sterile in the
But on this album, version. I mean, every song was just...
Well, let's start off with the song. Let's start off with the song.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Let's read the track list.
Side one is Roll Over Beethoven, written by Chuck Berry. Obviously, probably picked because it was the opening song at the Washington Coliseum as the lead-off track. Plus, let's be honest, it kicks. It's a great opening.
George's guitar playing on this is just unbelievable.
And just Ringo's entrance.
Yeah.
It's just,
it's funny because they did this differently in concert with harmony on the Roll Over Beethoven. Yeah. And I would have liked to have had that version on record. It's high energy. Ringo just goes nuts. And he went nuts in Washington, too. Definitely. And most of the time when he played it, just like he did with Long Tall Sally. I mean, if you watch Sweden drop in and you watch Ringo go nuts on Long Tall Sally, it's just incredible. But that song...
They reined him in for the studio version of Long Tall Sally.
They what?
They reined him in for the studio version of Long Tall Sally.
R-E-I-G-N. Okay, I'm sitting there thinking rain. I'm like, what?
No.
But that's part of what we've talked about before when some of the R&B that the Beatles would cover with George Martin as the producer, to compare like the BBC stuff where he wasn't there and they're doing a live feel, those songs sound a little more of a kick because it's not being done at EMI and it's not as proper, I guess.
Well, I also think that maybe because the Beatles were looser themselves, because now you're not in a studio, you are in a studio setting, but you know you're not recording it for a record to be out forever. You're just having fun.
Right.
And, it's on tape forever, some of them are, but I think the Beatles were just like, hey, the hell with it. Now is our chance to cut loose.
Right.
With this song.
The version they would play, when they were playing at the Cavern. It's only a year and a half earlier. So.
Yeah.
But some of that stuff I don't like as much as the BBC or even the record.
Right.
I mean, it depends on, version. They also grew musically. So they got to put their new knowledge and their musicianship to test a year and a half later. Think about it. The Cavern was just pills and
right.
other assorted things, and they played.
But isn't it interesting, too, that, and I know we'll get to side two, but it's funny, we start side one and side two with clearly two Beatle idols. Done accidentally, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna give this to Dave Dexter. regardless of anything I'm throwing at him before, his choice of tracks on this, as well as his strange version of like Rubber Soul a few years later, are great. They're great. They make for two great albums. But yeah, I think it's cool they start the album with Chuck Berry.
Yeah, and side 2, we'll get to is Little Richard. And the second song on side 1 is Thank You Girl.
Which I always thought was very weird because the Beatles were in lawsuits with VJ over all the stuff, and this song, which was a B-side a couple of times over on VJ, was picked. And I know they paid them, 2 cents mechanical fee for every whatever copy. I don't even remember how much it was, but I think it's 2 cents mechanical fee for every 1,000 copy, whatever it was. But they paid them for this song. Why? Because it was the British B-side too? I'm not sure. I mean, I like the song, and the version on this is a really, really different, unique version because of harmonicas and stuff.
There's placement, different placement.
There was different edit points on the British version and the American
and
version.
Different harmonica parts come in at different times versus the EP version in the UK and the B-side version here.
And by the way, VJ did receive 2 cents for every copy the Capitol album sold. So that's what it was. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. But it's weird because there was also a true stereo version on this of Thank You Girl that didn't show up anywhere else. It didn't show up in the UK in stereo anywhere until 40 years later.
I think there's also, it was on the 2009 remasters of Past Masters, but the second album version was also included on the Beatles Beat, which is the German release, which I love.
Which is wonderful.
Wonderful. But since some echo was added, that version is also a bit of a rarity. So there are some really unique versions on this that still don't appear really anywhere other than this.
Yeah.
So, people around the world who didn't get this would have to buy the Beatle Capitol albums CDs.
Volumes 1 and 2.
Well, yeah.
Which we highly recommend.
But the funny part about it is this song, to me, is the only song that, and I know that the Beatles are only how many years old or months old as a recording act at this point, but Thank You Girl is, to me, the song that has a little bit of a throwback feel even here.
Well, don't forget.
It is a throwback.
It is a throwback because these were recorded a year or two prior.
Right.
Well, a year.
A year. I'm sorry. March of '63.
Right. But it just shows how much they were trying to make "Thank You Girl" the single, and it didn't sort of became the B-side. But if you think about it, how fast they were moving as songwriters,
and not just as songwriters, but even as interpreters.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to figure there are a handful of originals here. You're really only looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 originals out of 11 tracks here. And the cool thing is that you compare this to those other 4 originals, and it sounds a little dated. Maybe it's the whatever it is, but it's dated. And it's kind of fun, even though I love it. I mean, don't get me wrong. One of my favorite early tracks of theirs. But anyway.
But Ringo kicks on this too.
Totally.
At the end, I mean.
Totally.
It's very hard as a drummer. Not hard, but it's a little more difficult than any other song to replicate at the end. The first drum beat is easy, but then when he does the roll on the snare and the tom-tom, unless I'm overcomplicating things, whenever I do it, it never sounds like Ringo's version.
Well, that's exactly it.
And also he does have the left-handed too, but he always gets the extra beat in there. But it's just different, and it's a really
And it's sort
good
of,
song.
If you think about it, it's a short time, but it's really Ringo's first drumming where it stands out for the way he plays.
That's very true.
That's a really good point. Yeah, in their recorded canon, you're right. This is the first time that Ringo
and he was a guy who didn't like drum solos, but this, it's sort of...
It's not a drum solo per se, but I know where you're going.
It fills in.
It's a fill. Yeah, it's Flash.
It's Flash, yeah.
It's Flash, which Ringo says he hates.
But he did it well.
Well, he did it
really well.
Think about it. We've talked about this ad nauseum, but if you really go through every Beatles song, whether Paul suggested the beat or George or John suggested the beat, it doesn't matter. Ringo played it. And Ringo, as much as he said he liked to go with the music itself and not kill it or overkill, there are some times when Ringo makes the song. And I don't care. And this is one of them, even though it's at the end.
Yeah.
And you know what? Oddly enough, the version with the harmonica that we get here, I like that version better than the one without the harmonica.
I do too. I think
it needs it.
And I'm not just saying it because we're Americans.
No, not at all. We're music fans.
It fits in, and you want to know why when they put it together in Great Britain,
they didn't.
I know. But
no, you want to know why they didn't. No, that's what I meant. I didn't mean to contradict you. I meant you want to know why they didn't use it, because why not? I mean, exactly. It fills in that little bit, because normally you're just hearing the guitar strumming and the bass, and you're like, whenever I hear the UK version, I always go, I can't help it.
I'd be curious to compare the dates of release, though, between this and the EP, to see which one if they came out almost simultaneously. We don't have to worry about it here, but it's just interesting. Anyway, our next track.
Track 3 is the first of 2 Motown tracks the Beatles covered.
Smokey.
Smokey Robinson wrote it.
It's pure Smokey.
Oh,
William Smokey Robinson.
Shut up.
William Smokey.
You really got a hold on me? Or is it you've really got a hold on me? It's depending.
It's been both, isn't it?
Yes,
it's been both. It's been both.
It's the endless debate.
This is one of my favorite Beatle covers, and
ever.
To me, it's one of John's great vocals. It just captured everything about.
But it's John and George.
Yeah,
which is
unique.
Different too.
That's
definitely
true.
Which is unique and nice. And
I love it. The voices go. Well, we all know George was the Smokey man.
Well, he wrote tribute songs.
Yeah, pure Smokey, right? As you alluded to. But it's funny because on this, it's so good, and George is singing it, and you hear him clearly in this, and it's not Paul.
Yeah.
And normally John and Paul, especially at this stage of the game.
Yes.
So off the bat, you get 2 out of the 3 songs are like George.
That's true. That's
Think
a
about
really
it.
good point.
For the Beatles' second album, the first song is pure George, and the third song is John and George.
And the second song is John, so Paul hasn't shown up yet, and then you get to track 4.
And it's George.
So one thing about I wanted to say one thing about the Motown thing.
Sure.
I've seen Smokey Robinson in some interviews talk about this.
Yep.
The Beatles were one of the first, rock and roll bands to cover Motown.
Well, to cover African-American artists. And let's just say what it is.
Motown was very appreciative of it, not just because it's made them bigger than they were already becoming. It sort of legitimized them that they have these songwriters.
Without a doubt.
And they could be covered and you get hits out of it. Obviously, if you've really got a hold of it, was put out as a single, would have been number 1.
Oh, yeah.
But I've heard him talk about that a couple of times in different spots, that it helped legitimize Motown. And because Motown was only 5 years old.
And he's always very grateful for it also.
And he was a vice president at the time, so.
It's also very funny because the Beatles, even though, in this stage of the game, they were still green, so to speak, having nothing to do with Capitol. But even later on in their recording career, well, probably up until like 66, they still did covers. Yeah. So they still were representing, a lot of the bands that no one knew, even though they could have easily just done all Lennon McCartney. Right. But they felt like they needed to do that because that's what the Beatles were all about.
And it was nice too because they weren't doing it, as you say, for lack of material. They weren't doing it for a greed factor to fill out album space. You had so many bands that were out there who were really pretty lame, to be blunt, where they had the one hit. And then the record company just scratches their heads and goes, "Oh hell, what are we gonna do? Well, we got to bring these guys in here. Do Louie, do this?" And they'd give them like a stack of tracks to do that were hits from a year or two ago to fill out an album. The Beatles was no such. They actually would just sit and consciously say, "Hey, man, we love doing this. Let's throw this on the album." Totally different feel. There was so much more autonomy there.
They were given. If you think about other bands at the time, the Beatles were very fortunate. They were allowed to do things that other bands were just not thought of to do.
That's what being a cash cow will do for you.
Well, that's what I was just about to say.
But
when you're bringing in the moolah, you know what? Have fun, guys.
Yeah, do what you want.
And at this point, they were.
And they were yet to have let's face it, the missteps didn't happen until Brian was gone. There were no missteps.
Really, think about it.
Really?
Now, in America, they just had Meet the Beatles, which was what? I know the sales figures, according to the RIA. I love this because Meet the Beatles itself is still only certified 5 million copies platinum. It is.
Right, but that's because the record companies have to report to the
I
RIAA.
understand, but when you read any book, they said it was selling 2 million copies a week. Okay? Now, I know myself.
It only sold for 2 weeks.
Yeah, 2.5 weeks.
2.5 weeks.
I actually have, I think, 7 copies in my collection alone.
I have 4.
I have at least 7. I'm not kidding.
I have 3.
I have mono, stereo, and I didn't do it that way. I just wore them out. So my father's friend owned the record store, and he just would give him another one, whether it was mono. It didn't matter. I mean, I wasn't that intuitive or an audiophile yet. I liked the Beatles. I was an idiot kid. So he kept bringing home more copies. So there's no way that thing sold 5 million through 2012.
But also, after 1987, until the reissues,
I know
they weren't sold anymore, except on cassette. You know,
wait a minute. So from 64 to 87, they sold 5 million, 2 million a week. So it sold for 2.5 weeks, and it never sold again.
Not to mention when people were buying them just to burn them, which was a total.
Which was true.
Which was true.
Well, I think that pile.
That's always the one that was on the pile.
You know what happened? I think they were pressed. But they weren't pressed by Capitol. They were pressed by another company, but sold by
Capitol,
by someone. And you know those people, you know.
But you know what?
Not to mention the copies that were pressed on my Uncle Guido's basement.
On my Uncle Guido's basement?
In my Uncle.
But you know what, though? All kidding aside, they had an album just 3 months prior, and actually just 1 month prior in March, it was still selling amazingly.
Yeah.
So the Beatles were able to do whatever the hell they want. I mean, I hate to say it that way, but they did. And you know what? As long as they were still doing the ka-ching for Capitol,
no one was going to question.
Well, this is only their second album for Capitol, so it's...
Third. I know, for second album. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's right.
I'm kidding. You said for Capitol, so you're correct.
But I think, you know, at that time, I think they were just thinking, this is just going to be a year thing, and by the end of the year, we'll release Beatles 65.
But don't forget, a lot of these covers also they were doing in,
the Beatles were doing
the Cavern,
it too. Yeah, but
in the Star Club. I mean, they were doing a lot of the
covers.
Part
of it was filler. Part of it was to fill, but it was their choice to fill. It wasn't, as Tony said, here's Louie again.
Right.
Yeah. Here's a lame band. They got lucky with this one track they wrote that's getting some airplay. Oh, crap. We should do an album to really cash in. Here, guys. You know, this was... Wow, we got this band that's on fire. What do they want to do? I mean, if they had walked in and wanted to do Mary Had a Little Lamb... Oh, wait.
That was later.
It was later.
Well,
but if they'd walked in and wanted to do Mary Had a Little Lamb, you know, here you go, guys, knock yourselves out. No one was going to stop them and say, oh, you can't do that. Oh, wait, no, that's a different song.
That's another song.
That's another song on the side one.
Anyway.
No, let's get back to it because Devil in Her Heart is the next song, right? And
Track 4 is Devil in Her Heart.
And that's another George song.
Another George vocal.
All kidding aside there, too,
funny.
but vocal for George.
Yeah.
And Devil in Her Heart, as we said, was the Donays.
The Donays. In fact, the interesting thing about this is that this single was extremely obscure. So much so that fans that were musos that were looking for the original Donays 45 at the time to hear the original version on Brent Records was struggling like hell to actually find one. So
I never heard
think that I mean, granted, we weren't around at the time. We weren't collecting singles in 1964. But
who are they?
They were a one-hit wonder,
little known American
group,
girl group.
And the funny part of it is, to hear the original, you had to wait years and years and years until Rhino Records or some of these companies in Europe, like Ace or whatever, started doing those girl group compilations, where people were able to track down original copies of it to actually hear what the first version sounded like.
But on this Ringo really shines too because he brings in that Latin samba beat.
Totally.
So it makes it sound like a Latin song.
Oh,
almost.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a cool beat by him.
From a rhythmic standpoint, just the delivery of the line from the guys in harmony of the "She's got the devil in her heart." To
me, that's the only part of the song I like. It has a really off beat, and I can see why the Beatles were attracted to it because it was something
wonderful,
different they can play in the clubs.
But
and
also, I think the 3-part harmony was good for them.
Yeah,
the call and response. Done This Boy.
Right. The call and response. I think it's the first time really you get a call and responce.
But
on a
they
Beatles
knew their
record
strengths.
like that.
And I'm sure George Martin might have said also, look, that's a cool song, guys. And I know, this is all looking back and wishing, but I would love to hear a lot of the takes of Devil in Her Heart before they made it into a 3-part harmony. Because maybe they didn't. I would love to hear that.
Well, the original is kind of a straight 2 or 3-part harmony. The original, the girls are singing it together.
Oh, I know, but
we should mention that it was originally the Devil in His Heart. Right. There is a gender change there.
Well, it makes sense to change it.
Oh, absolutely. But
they didn't change boys.
We haven't mentioned that.
Well, that's true.
We haven't
which
mentioned
I still don't understand.
Right.
Well, girls just doesn't sound as good as
No.
Girls, what a bundle of what? What can you do with that? Curls? I don't know. They could have done that. What a bundle of curls.
I
don't know.
I'm not going there.
There you go.
I think the Stones covered that pretty well.
Very nice. Right.
Okay, the next track is track 5 on side 1 is a cover of Money. The second Motown song they cover.
Yeah.
And they did this
originally
forever.
done by Barrett Strong, which was recorded with the Beatles.
Also rhythmically quite different. The original Motown version.
Yeah, if you listen to the Motown version is much
a little more watch your step, a little more
a little watch your step.
Similar to that.
Yeah.
Just a different different feel.
And I think what helps this is the piano George Martin plays on this.
Absolutely.
I think he he has a guy, kind of straight-laced and he's playing this great piano.
And who really, if you think about it in this cut, who became a member of the band.
On this one, yeah.
Really, and I think in a way, is this kind of the first time?
No, I'm thinking not a second time.
Yes, you're correct. You're absolutely right.
Probably was his first being a real...
But don't forget, in the UK, that's the same album. Not a Second Time and Money are the same album.
Oh, right.
In the UK. So, but you're correct, though,
for
too.
Us.
But you're absolutely right.
You're right.
Meet the Beatles, Not a Second Time would have been the first time we would have heard George Martin as a member of the group. But now, let's look at it again. The trend that you're talking about, Mitch. Now we're on track 5. There's still no McCartney yet.
Matter of fact, if you think about it, this is not a Paul McCartney album.
No, this is not a Paul McCartney side.
Side 2.
Look at the other side, dude.
No, I know, but
it's one Paul
we'll
song.
get to that. But look at this. You've got Paul, the cute one, whose presence is not even really felt in any way all through side 1.
That's true.
I don't know.
I bet you if it was nowadays, Paul would have paid to have the record redone.
But in a way, the funny part of it, though, is that if you think about it, not that Paul ever really commented heavily on any of the American records, but at that time, they were just probably so happy. I have to wonder if by now they were involved in that whole thing of counting, oh, well, you got 2 on this side, I get 1, you get 1, I get 1, Ringo gets 1. I don't know if that was happening yet. It seems to me like it was just... Let's make the thing. I know the Beatles had no input on the running order of this.
I will tell you one thing, exactly what you're saying. I will tell you that there was an interview in 1970, April of 70. George was specifically asked about his songwriting and stuff. And in that interview, George does say that it wasn't until very, very later in the Beatles' career when they actually made a deal to do 3-3-2 or 3-3-3-2. I mean, I'm talking late 60s.
Interesting.
So by this time...
Nobody was counting.
Nobody was counting. And you know what? I don't think the Beatles cared at that point
because
they were happy to have albums out.
Hell yeah.
I bet you they found out about this record after it came out.
I agree.
Probably.
They had nothing to do with this.
It came out April of 64. They're doing a Hard Day's Night.
It's more of the Monkees.
So, I was just about to say they're wearing JCPenney clothes on the cover. I was just about to make a more of the Monkees joke for our Monkees fans out
figured,
there.
Hey, if they could do it with the Beatles, I'm going to do it.
Yeah, but you never heard John Lennon say, anything bad
didn't
about
like it.
Beatles.
Yeah, we hate it. In fact, John does comment, if I'm not mistaken, on the Beatles' second album during his interview with Dennis Elsis. Electrifying big beat performances. Dennis Elsis reads the front cover.
Oh, yeah.
Which is what it says on the cover.
And John says, yeah, it's one of those American compilations that you got. And, and Dennis, I think, even comments about, I love this. This is a great... And John says something effective. Yeah, it's a collection of all the stuff that we, and... he doesn't say anything derogatory, really. Just the fact that...
But don't forget, this came out in April, as a matter of fact, April 10th of 64. Can you imagine that just for a minute? And I'm going to go back to the point you just made, but imagine that. This comes out pretty much a week after the Beatles had the top 5 on the Billboard Hot 100. Are you kidding me?
Yeah,
How much hotter can you have gotten?
Right.
And She Loves You was part of that 5.
Yeah.
You were sticking a match in an open flame.
Oh,
really,
my
with this,
Lord.
what you were doing.
You just went in there with
Which is why She Loves You's on the cover.
Right. Exactly. But, I don't know. I mean, it's weird. Was that a happy coincidence? Because they didn't know the Beatles would have the top 5.
Well, they didn't know they had the top 5, but they knew that Swan had put it out.
Right.
And it was going up the charts, right.
Yeah. And they knew that at that point, anything that they were touching was starting to go.
Basically, yeah.
But back to your point, though, about Paul not counting. I just think, as we said, these songs to the Beatles were all recorded in 63. So they were still young. They were happy to have records out, and they didn't even know about this album because they had nothing to do with it. They had nothing to do with the cover, anything. I mean, we'll talk about it as well. Pictures from Washington and Ed Sullivan. Yeah. So it was nothing to do with the Beatles. So I'm sure when they got a hold of it, maybe they had some reservations. Who knows? Right. Maybe Paul said, "Hey, I'm not on this at all." But as long as the checks were coming in, I don't think they cared at that point.
Right.
And actually, the Beatles couldn't have said anything because in their contract,
no control.
Right.
They had no control over what their releases in America, at least.
Yeah, at least America.
Well, the closer of side one of my all-time favorite cuts in the whole world
is "You Can't Do That."
I love it.
And thank goodness it was not on in the movie, because I think because of that they were able to put it on here, weren't they? Then I'm wrong.
The movie came out. The soundtrack came out in
a little later.
A little later. So,
but Mitch is
they
saying
didn't use
because
it in
it wasn't
movie.
Featured in the film that they were able to put this out.
So they were able to put it out on here, I believe.
Right. I don't think that was the reason.
Is that not the reason?
No,
I'm wrong, folks.
I just thought it was. They had been filmed, obviously, but I'm not sure when Dick Lester said, "Well, there's too much music in this movie. Let's cut out. You can't do that."
Or were they even recording toward the film yet by this point? Because if you have to figure, this was either recorded in February or March of '64. Was the album for the film in the can yet?
I don't even know, but I know
I don't think so.
But this song got a lot of attention later on as well. That had, quote, legs, because the Beatles were on Ed Sullivan with the clip of "You Can't Do That" in May of '64.
Right.
So now all of a sudden, I mean, there's no way Capitol could have known that, but that was a happy. They're all going, yay, ka-ching, ka-ching. Because now this album had legs to begin with. Because, I mean,
but now another song was being spotlighted.
Spotlighted, and it wasn't even meant to be spotlighted.
Right.
How happy is that? Any band nowadays would be like, oh, please, Fab4Free4All, can you play one of our songs? Yeah. I mean, all kidding aside, they'd be happy for anybody to, because after the first month of an album, unless it's, a well-known, really huge, it's gone.
It's dead.
I mean, even Paul's album, Kisses on the Bottom, died. I hate to say
unless you're Adele.
Unless you're Adele, yeah.
Good on you, Adele. We like you. Sorry.
But also, if just on a side note here, if that clip wasn't shown on Sullivan, that would have been lost. Because all the outtakes are gone from A Hard Day's Night. And because they sent that to Sullivan.
Specifically for his show.
Yeah, they didn't say, well, this is from
retain their own copy.
They had their own copy, but it's interesting because he didn't say this is from the forthcoming movie. He just said, here's You Can't Do That.
Ed wasn't going to credit anything other than, right here it is. But one of my favorite Lennon vocals ever. It's a great song to do live with a band, and it's just
also, John
wonderful.
Is playing lead rhythm on that song.
Yes,
which is
absolutely
something he hadn't really done before.
Yep. Wow,
and
good call, Rob.
It's so interesting to hear, especially for me as a rhythm guitar player, someone playing the hell out of the Rickenbacker.
Nice.
Just seems like, bam, 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 and it's incredible to try to play because he's playing notes. He's not hitting everything the way you would normally hit a rhythm. Right. He's hitting some notes and then he's continuing down on others. It's a great solo that he does just as a rhythm player.
Nice.
So
good point.
Also, it's got different timing in it. The song goes into different times, structures. Yeah. Just a unique song for a group of 20, 21-year-olds.
They play with time structures a few instances on this record, and we'll get to one on side 2.
Well, hold it. Well, let's take a break. We'll get back to side 2 right after this. And welcome back to the Fab4Free4All as we talk about the Beatles' second album. I'm Rob Leonard. Joining me again is Tony Trugardo.
Hey, folks.
And Mitch Axelrod.
Still here.
And we're talking about the Beatles' second album, which is a rock and roll
pastiche.
Pastiche is a very good one.
I
like pastiche, though.
I was going to use Frankenstein, but someone else, some author once used that they called this a Frankenstein of a record. I forgot who the author was.
Well, you know what? You say Frankenstein, you say pastiche, and I'll say cornucopia, and we're all right.
Which makes it a Frankenpastacopia. Anyway.
Okay, I just
all right.
So let's get to side 2, track 1.
Yes.
We were just talking about how basically Paul, as a lead singer on this album, is very much underrepresented.
Maybe that's because he screams so hard on this track that he just blows his voice out for the rest of the album.
Yeah, maybe you should have done it last like Twisted Chat.
So the side 2 begins with Little Richard's Long Tall Sally.
Woo! Youch.
Which is one of
Paul all he knows, man.
which is one of Paul's greatest vocals.
Without a doubt.
And
It smokes.
and
in concert.
Yeah.
they did this live in concert. So
And he even in '86 he did it at Prince's Trust, and he did it in the same key.
Yep.
I mean, you got to give the guy some credit.
Smack him.
But it is interesting, and when they did their American tour, and Long Tall Sally's their closer. Now, mind you, it was their closer for a while. But I'm wondering if they said, "Oh, look, it's on Beatles' second album. Maybe the Americans now know it or something."
You know what? It has the distinction of being the last song the Beatles ever sang live together.
Right.
Yeah.
In Candlestick.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, it wasn't filmed because they ran out.
Right.
But
Or taped.
I'm sorry, taped because they ran out. But I mean, could you imagine that? This song here, Long Tall Sally, and in '66, they had everything.
Yeah.
And they still chose to do this one last for the last show. Now they didn't know it would be the last show ever.
But if you think about it,
I know, but I'm just giving them the benefit of the doubt because people are going to write saying, well, they didn't know.
It bounces back to the idea that if you were going to be in a situation like they were, where you couldn't duplicate the songs that were being put out on your new album live, and you had to kind of stick with material that was as primitive as it could be, you may as well in 1966 go back to the stuff that was for them was their roots.
Also,
really.
they didn't really rehearse for the '66 tour.
No, they didn't. But
they had to remember things.
I think it did kind of say something that we're going to close the show out with Long Tall Sally. Screw it. We're not going to try to duplicate another girl or something like that. Let's just rip it out with
one that we knew.
Yeah, let's blow it out.
I have to correct myself because I know someone is going to correct me. It's not the last song the Beatles ever performed live. That would be what? Get Back?
No, you should say live on tour.
Live on a tour.
Regularly scheduled concert.
In front of a paying audience. It's the last
regularly scheduled concert.
Yes. For the paying audience.
Because the
rooftop was certainly not scheduled.
No.
Sort of.
And no one saw it except if you were
And no one paid for it unless you were trying to get through traffic in London.
It just doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense.
Unless you were like Yoko or Chris O'Dell.
Right. They didn't pay for it.
They didn't pay.
I'm sure.
Anyway.
Well, maybe.
We should also say that Long Tall Sally was released in America first. We mentioned it a little bit early, but since we're up to it now, a couple of months before, or a few weeks before, I should say, the Long Tall Sally EP, which for Americans, that's a little advantage. We're always thought that, we always got everything after the Brits with these reissues or restructuring of albums that they did.
And the Long Tall Sally stereo version is essentially like a fake-ish stereo. There's that echo added on. There's no echo in the mono version. But on the stereo version, there's that echo that just blasts through your head. The Dexter stuff. Also, just to go back really quick, you can't do that. The mono version that's on the Beatles' second album does differ from the Hard Day's Night mono version in the UK. So there's some different versions there. But Long Tall Sally, again, one of the best Paul vocals.
Put it on, and I dare you not to sing along, drum on your steering wheel, or something,
and try to yell "woo" in the right key. Anyway,
once I did, but that was when my voice was changing.
We'll call you Little Tony after that one. Tony is.
I heard nobody calls you Little Tony.
Nobody calls me Little Tony.
Hey. Now the next
Little Richard. Ew.
He's Big Richard.
I don't know, and I don't want to know. Let's go on, shall we?
The next track on side 2, the second track, is also a track that was part of the Long Tall Sally EP, but released in the United States first. I Call Your Name, which has variations all over the place.
Definitely. A couple of different takes on that where
more cowbell.
More cowbell, baby. We need more cowbell.
Reference.
Yeah, there's the cowbell differences. The nice thing about this is this was their first reference to what they called blue beat at the time, which is the early take on ska, really.
Right. John always said it was first use of ska, at least for him, but it's not true ska.
No, it's definitely not true ska, but you could tell that the intention's there when it goes into the middle break.
It's sort of ska played by John Lennon.
It's ska played, exactly. Just that little change, that unka chunka of the guitar stuff in there. is kind of an early idea of ska, but it was the kind of thing where hearing that on a British record or an American record or any record put out by a bunch of white kids at the time would have had anybody going, what the heck is that?
Yeah.
Really?
And think about
and
ska
was unique.
Really wasn't very well known at the time.
Not at all.
Nope.
So, and we could mention too later, this was covered by the Mamas and Papas.
That's right. Their version was much different.
Oh, much
different.
You know, the way the Beatles would cover a song, the Mamas and Papas went very vocalish on that.
Well, I think they went.
It's an interesting choice for the Mamas and Papas, I think, for them to cover that song.
Yeah.
I just think Cass Elliot was very showy in it.
Yes, and she's also was John obsessed at the time.
Oh, very, yeah. Well, that's well known.
But again, the nice thing about this too is it's the damn guitar lick. It's that down, 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 down. You know, it comes in cold guitar, just like Roll Over Beethoven. Just like
George's 12-string, by the way, is also different on from the mono and stereo version. The opening 12-string is
slightly different.
Slightly different.
Yeah. And it's, 3 songs on the album. Roll Over Beethoven, You Can't Do That, I Call Your Name, all start with that cold guitar lick, a guitar intro, which is very cool. And it's probably the only time you really hear that a lot on Beatles stuff. And you were talking about...
Well, Roll Over, you really got to hold them in money. Well, money is sort of with
the piano,
other things,
the piano. And you were saying about the difference in the versions.
Well, the U.S. edit is right before Call Your Name, and the U.K. edit is, because there's an edit on this, is But You're Not There.
Now, when we talk about an edit, what we're talking about is the fact of 2 takes.
Yeah, these were joined together
to make one take.
For whatever reason, the U.S. version was cut at a different spot than the U.K. version. But I think part of it has to do with the fact that a lot of this stuff was being rushed to the States.
Yes.
And they hadn't really finished it. And they said, okay, we'll just give it to the U.S. because who cares, It's United States.
Cares? It's only the single biggest market in the world.
We're people from Great Britain. We originate this stuff.
Yes, we'll have the definitive version of it. Let's give those Americans, those silly Americans,
we'll give them the crap. We don't care.
Let's give it to this Dexter fellow who doesn't know what the hell he's doing anywhere.
So I Call Your Name is track 2. Track 3, if you listen to the Marvelettes version, which is a nice version.
It's a fine version.
But if you listen to the Beatles version, Please Mr. Postman, there is a desperation in John Lennon's voice about getting a piece of mail.
Yeah.
And you believe...
a piece of mail.
And
nice.
Something from the Postal Service, from the British Post.
Yeah.
He makes it sound not sad, but like something he needs.
Oh, yeah.
And there's no doubt in his voice about what he's getting from the Post.
It's very different than the Marvelettes, you're right. I mean, even the George and Paul opening, which starts this, but even that hi-hat hit and the snare hit by Ringo, it makes it a very powerful song from the beginning.
You know what it is? The Marvelettes version, you know that there is a letter in the bag.
Yeah.
The Beatles version, you know there's probably no letter in the bag. Like, it's almost as though, like, he's freaking in this version of it.
To an extent.
Right, like, she said she'd call.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's
exactly, calling.
Yeah,
She said she'd write.
I've been standing here waiting, Mr. Postman, so patiently. Yeah. Like, it's just sort of, in the girls' version, it's just like, oh, yeah, it's time. I'm going to get my letter from my boyfriend.
Yay.
In the Beatle version, it's just kind of like,
where's my letter?
Oh, John, screwed again.
Dear John.
It's a Dear John letter. There you
Except
go.
he's not getting it. How funny is that?
But his vocal is
outstanding.
I mean, one of his best. No one ever talks about, everyone always talks about Twist and Shout. Please, Mr. Postman, I think is one of his best.
I do too. One of his best rockers.
I mean, even delivered the letter, the sooner the better.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, that's pure John. It really is, because even though they sing that in the Marvelette, it's just that it doesn't quite come off the same way.
No, I agree with you on that.
It's
sublime.
This actually, I know you said that You Really Got a Hold on Me is one of your favorite Beatle covers. Yeah. This happens to be one of mine.
And it's the kind of thing with this where, years later we'd get the Carpenters version. It would have a hit with this.
Oh, boy.
But it's interesting how they complain. And I'm not a Carpenters hater.
I'm a huge Carpenter fan.
I'm a Carpenters fan also.
I'm really not.
Oh, she had one of the best voices ever going in the world.
But it doesn't change the fact that, boy, did they just pour water all over this track and dilute it down.
To Ride.
And Ticket to Ride.
And the only one that I really like of theirs is Calling Occupants
of Interplanetary Craft.
Which is Klaatu.
Yeah, which is a Beatle cover. Because Klaatu were the Beatles. But anyway.
Yeah. In Canada only.
In Canada only, yes. But anyway, so we've gone off topic here. Please, Mr. Postman.
Great.
Amazing.
Yes.
Absolutely amazing.
Our next one is I'll Get You, which, of course, was the B-side of She Loves You on Swan Records and making an appearance now on Capitol Records. And could have been an A-side if they'd wanted to be that, but they went with She Loves You.
They chose this to do live.
That wisely, yeah.
No, but they did I'll Get You live.
Yeah.
Early on. It sounds
absolutely.
very different live, but even the bass of John's voice, oh yeah. I mean, even that end, it's so good. I always loved this song. Oddly enough, my kids love this because it's very simple. It's pure pop.
That's true. I didn't think of that. That's true. It is a pure pop record.
I mean, it's
that's
just,
really
I'll
very
get you
true.
in the end. It's just, yes, I will. And it's them telling you, don't fight it. I'm getting you. You're mine. And it's so cool. It's just a pure piece of pop. But the oh yeahs work better here than in
yeah, they do. That's
so they
true.
don't date it as much.
But it's
even
funny,
though we probably recorded around the same time.
because it's got that "I'll get you in the end" aspect to it, but it's not said with any nastiness because I think about you night and day.
Right.
Like it's actually a very
It's a stalker song.
hopeless romance. It's a stalker
It is.
song.
Imagine
really.
No, it's not. I'm in love. No, but it's a
Imagine,
very,
yeah.
but it's a very hopeless romantic song though, which is nice.
Oh,
it's
it's
actually
great. No, it's-
for John. It's unique in its
because-
hopeless romanticism.
Yeah, right. Okay.
In a way.
I'll give you that.
you know.
true.
X gets a square.
So
And the last track, just an idea, a thought process.
Uh-oh.
If I was redoing this album, I would have taken Thank You Girl, put it on side 2, move Please Mr. Postman right to track 2. Because Thank You Girl, when we were saying it sort of throws off side 1 a little bit,
yeah,
on side 2 it would fit better. Going
This is
into
true.
going into I'll Get
yes,
You.
I like that. Thank you, girl, and I'll get you. I
Yeah.
like that. That does work. Okay.
And of course, the last track, track 11 or track 5 on side 2, was a big hit.
Opening with the drum work.
Yeah.
This to
She
me
Loves
is
You.
this could go either way. This could have been the perfect album opener or the perfect album closer.
Right.
It doesn't matter to me.
Yes.
Those thunderous, which is what really I remember hearing this on the radio, not in '63, but
God,
later, even in the mid to late '60s, you'd still hear this. And as soon as you hear that thunder on the radio, you just you smile.
And if you think about that open, it's what, 2 seconds? And it sounds like a thundering herb.
It is.
Totally.
Ba-dum, ba-dum.
It's like
And
two drums
whoa.
together.
And when you hear it even today on, here in American radio, oldies radio, you still have to smile.
Funny you say that because it has a tribal aspect to it. That like there's that, he goes to the toms there, and it's incredible to drive in this single, in this track. Again, Paul always talks about what's the song he says, God Only Knows, as being, the perfect pop song. If you want to flip it around and look at this really is probably the perfect rock single.
And
perfect.
It
rock
is.
single.
And you know how John sort of dismissed the song? He said, I can't see singing She Loves You at age 30.
Right. Yeah,
but
30,
one
right.
thing that, and I assume Paul's telling the truth on this story, he said that before he went out to L.A., where he was hanging out with John for a little bit in '74, he had met with Yoko, and basically Yoko had said, hey, that she still loves John, and please pass this message along. And Paul has always said that he went to John and said, hey, she still loves you. Making this like
very relevant
for John
11 years later.
11 years later. So it's kind of interesting that John's always dismissed the song, and here it's kind of comes true with Paul and him out in L.A.
Well, he even dismissed
really cool.
in '64 because he would always, it's from last year and it's called She Loves You.
Oh,
At the Hollywood
that's
Bowl.
my favorite intro from the Hollywood Bowl.
It's from last
It's
year.
an
and
oldie.
called
It's an oldie. It's
I
from
hope
last
you remember it.
Some of you older people might remember it.
It's from last year. It's called She Loves
Of course,
You. It's like,
She Loves You was released in the American market in '63 on Swan. Didn't do anything.
Isn't that incredible?
Yeah.
I mean, that unto itself blows your mind as to people can talk all they want about the fact that, a great single is a great single. And they used to say this in the 60s. Oh, if it's great, it's going to catch on. No, that's a load of crap. Even back then, as much as now, it was all about the marketing, how much money you had behind you, and how much presence something could have in the market. Because if She Loves You could come out on Swan.
But then again, Swan was
and Tank.
Was a small label. Dick
They were
Clark
small
used to be
subsidiary-
involved with it.
Absolutely.
He had to just
But
get
still,
rid of it when he got rid of all his record industry contacts
interests,
and stuff. Interests.
But if it didn't even become a local or a regional hit on Swan, then that just tells you that Swan had nothing going for it because it's not always about the material. You hear you had one of the greatest singles in the world.
Part of life is timing too. Yeah, we know
true
that.
Too.
Yeah,
very true too.
What a great album closer.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm with you. It could have been the opening
too. And I would have been just as happy.
Yeah.
I mean,
I think it works better as a closer only because its standard is so high for the opener. You know,
that's a good point. It's hard to go anywhere after that in a way.
That's true, but you know, even and I know we're getting technical with music here, but think about Roll Over Beethoven. If that was the closer, that's nice. You know, dig to these rhythm and blues. Boom. That's good, but. You know,
but think about it. Roll Over Beethoven was the
album done.
But Roll Over Beethoven was the closer on the '64 tour. So
was it?
Yeah.
What was?
No.
Roll Over Beethoven.
No.
No.
No. Roll Over Beethoven was like 3 or 4. Yeah.
Or 6 actually. Why don't we talk about the cover a little bit? The cover had no Beatle involvement, as we said. There are 12 shots of Ed Sullivan, a rehearsal shot. And
depending on what version you got of the album, those photos were either sepia looking or kind of pink.
Yeah, it depended.
Depended on what version you bought, where it was pressed, what year you got it.
I always wanted it to be just black and white, but
I always did too. I always wanted the damn things in black and white, but it was weird.
And there's a lot of different pictures, all taken by Joe Cavello. George Osaki designed both the front and back, and you know. And
I think it was kind of cool. I think it's a high energy looking front and back cover. When I was young, I always loved it because it was just cool. It has movement.
But very odd that there's half faces, which would then later come out on United Artists.
Yeah.
Hard Day's Night.
Yep.
And I'm not so sure. I mean, the Beatle fans would know, but you know, if you were a new Beatle fan, did you know whose half face they were at the time?
Yeah, that's true.
Okay.
That's true.
I'm just
I
saying.
want to know why there's a picture of Ringo's ear.
Because it's a nice ear.
It's basically his ear. His eye is covered.
Because the music is ear piercing. Sorry.
I always loved the cover of this, down to the lettering. That's been borrowed by different people, put out rarity albums over the years. I always liked the cover and the back of the album, so to speak.
And the back of the album is more like Ed Sullivan show.
Right. And of course, the trend begins on the back of the Capitol albums where Beatles' second album, and they're going to use it as an opportunity to advertise the previous album.
Like
on the
it needed
side.
it.
Like it needed it, but oh my God, what a bunch of whores. I mean, really, in the UK, could you imagine if, you know, EMI in the UK had said, all right, fellows, on the back cover, we'd like to put an ad for the previous album. The Beatles would have been like, get the hell out of here. Yeah. I mean,
no, you're right.
But think about it. You know, even the hyperbole on the back cover, and here they are, the world's most popular foursome, singing and playing their new collection of hits. Now, there's only one hit on here, you know? Or I'll Get You as a B-side. So think about it. You know, that's great American hyperbole. Never before has show business seen and heard anything like them.
Right, but again, you know, they also never knew. I mean, Capitol had all kinds of audacity. Suppose something had happened tomorrow and material was delayed coming from the Beatles. What would they have done? They would have culled another single or two from second album and just kept the fire going. I mean, let's be honest. If the Beatles, for whatever reason, something happened and Paul sprained his thumb and there was a delay in material for a couple of weeks, you could bet that, you know...
Oh, I'm sure.
Devil in Her Heart would have been pulled as an A-side or something ridiculous only to shoot up the charts again.
Well, you know, at this time when this came out, Can't Buy Me Love was #1.
Right.
And that wasn't even on a record yet.
Well, it's funny. It says in the ads that they put in like Billboard and Cashbox and all that, it said, for the first time on any album, their smash #1 single, She Loves You, and Roll Over Beethoven. So it makes me think that Roll Over Beethoven was also #1.
But it also may have been an intended single in the U.S. It's possible, you know, you never know. We don't have any evidence to prove that per se, but it could have been an intended follow-up.
I think there was talk of it, but I think Brian Epstein said we only want to release our own stuff.
Right.
Or
Beatle
John
compositions.
Lennon, Paul McCartney songs. So I think that was part of it.
But the ad does mention what you guys just said, Can't Buy Me Love, and You Can't Do That.
And here's what's strange about the ad, though. It's here, it's on Capitol, and it's all Beatles. What is that supposed to mean? It's not all Beatle compositions.
No, that was a dig at VJ. Think about it. VJ put out an album of half and half.
That's right.
Frank Ifield and the Beatles.
You're absolutely right. Beatles and Frank Ifield on stage, the Beatles versus the Four Seasons. You're absolutely right.
And that's all Beatles.
Another question, why is it Can't Buy Me Love on this record, but You Can't Do That is?
Because Can't Buy Me Love may be having something to do with the fact that it was going to be used in the film. Can't Buy Me Love was going to be used in the movie.
They were not allowed to use it.
That's right.
So that was being held back until UA had the first
crack at it.
That's true.
So now you can't do that. Wasn't going to be used on anything, so they said, "Here, put it on that."
Yeah, they had to wait till something new, but they didn't put "Can't Be Up By Me Love" on that. They put other stuff from the soundtrack.
Right.
But,
That's just weird.
Right.
yes, it's very strange.
But we'll do that in the Something New show.
Yes.
Anyway, where does that leave us, Mr. Leonard?
I think we've covered all bases concerning this
we have
fine
as well.
record, which we love.
We have to rate it.
Yeah.
What is your ratings, Mr. Mitch Axelrod?
Oh, come on. You know, I'm gonna
do it, baby, do it.
All right, I'm gonna quote an old estranged fiance of ours, and I'm gonna say I give it a 10.
Yeah, baby.
I have to.
I give it a 10 also.
I really do. And what do you do, Tone?
Not just because of the great performances, but this rarities that you only find on this record.
You're absolutely right.
So,
Right.
And my youth and my growing up forces me.
And your conformity.
And my conformity. No, man. Just because I get stuck going last year.
Right, exactly.
And I give it a 10.
I will say this. And we do. I
It is
wanted
a
to
10
say
for
one
me.
thing to our audience. We have had some people who say, listen, because we do get some letters. We actually get a lot of letters, and we love them.
Yes.
But we do get people who say, guys, I wish you guys would disagree a little bit more. And we do. Believe me, we do. I mean, oh my God. when
Come
we
to
get
our Paul is Dead lecture. And
Yes, and when we get to the Driving Rain CD, we're going to disagree.
I don't think we're going to disagree that much,
Oh,
really.
okay.
No, that's
Maybe
like
that's
Ringo
a
the
bad
Fourth.
example.
Yeah, we all did like Ringo the Fourth.
But we didn't. But actually, someone quickly pointed out that two of us gave it a 3 and one of us gave it a 4. So in essence, we gave it a 10. And anyway, I will say this.
But Tony hated it the most, and he gives it a higher number.
and he gave it no more than us. I know.
Whatever.
No, but we do disagree a lot. But it is the Beatles. I hate to say it. They did put out some unbelievable stuff. So we are going to agree on a lot of it because a lot of it was just simply that good. Is anybody out there really going to tell me that they're going to give this below an 8 or 9 because the Dave Dexter mixes? Maybe. But you know what? We happen to all like them.
But
So
I happen to like that. That's part of my 10 rating.
And
You
for
can
me,
disagree with us.
For me, I don't. I'm going to say straightforward. I don't love all of the Dexterization on this record, not at all. But
it's heavy on this.
it's very heavy. But it's also ingrained in my youth.
That's the point I was trying to make.
So
this was
part
the
of
first
it
time
is-
we got it.
Yes, and part of it for me, and I can safely say I'm going back and giving it a 10, partly based on sentimentality.
I'm wondering what
Really?
would happen, quite honestly, if we took the remasters today and made a new Beatles second album using the 2009 remasters.
I'm going to go home and do that.
and then play them, and would it have the same impact on
I'm
you
gonna go home and do
as
that.
the, I'm going to say the Dexter version?
I'm going to go do that.
Only because it might be kind
I
of
like
a cool
it.
thing to do.
It is a cool thing.
Because
to
then
do.
you really would get the feel of how you felt when Dave Dexter did it.
Yeah,
And the echo.
yeah.
That's something to do.
All right.
We are
So we
gonna-
give it a 10.
I think we do.
And that just about does it, as the Fab4Free4All looked at the Beatles' second album
27 minutes long.
on Capitol Records.
Have your buyer call CRDC and order immediately. I'm quoting
And
the ad.
Just as a reminder, for those who don't know, I am the host of a show called Beatles Songs, which airs every Friday from 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. on 90.3 FM WHPC in Garden City, New York. Also streaming at ncc.edu/WHPC, or go to tunein.com and do a search on WHPC. Tony, you have anything to add?
Well, yeah, my show, 4F, Freeform at 4 Free, can be heard on Monday nights from 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time over 88. Too much fun. Over 88.1 FM WCWP and streaming on WCWP.org.
And you can hear me in the shower. Sorry. Again.
No, I don't want to hear you in the shower.
Well, I'm actually pretty
I'd rather
good.
hear you right here on the air.
Oh,
Of
no,
course,
you
Mitch is
don't.
the author of Beatle Tunes. If you'd like to get a copy of the book, it's available through any place that sells books. Or write Mitch. He'll
Yeah.
send you a copy, an autographed copy.
Well, I'm not going to just send it
Well,
to
you got to pay for it, but it's a good book. I have
mean,
a
I'm
copy.
nice, but
I
not
would
that.
go.
Tony has a copy. It's a
Yeah.
nice little book.
I have mine. Mine's not signed, though.
It isn't? Mine is.
Wow.
I don't think it is, seriously.
I hated
mine
him.
is.
I didn't
Anyway.
like him. No, but you could certainly go out and read that. I hope you do. It's the only book on the Beatle cartoons ever.
And contact us on Facebook through our
Yeah.
Facebook page at...
Fab4Free4All. If you have a comment about this show or any show.
At AOL.com.
Also, Fab4Free4All.
At AOL.com.
At AOL.com. But we also have individual Facebook pages. We have a Facebook page for Fab4Free4All. And we also have our website. The Fab, the number 4, free, the number 4, all.
.com. When
.com.
you go to the blog, and a lot of you have been doing that, and, feel free to tell us anything you want. A lot of you have giving us criticism, which is fine. We could take it.
And if you have a show idea, maybe we'll do it.
We definitely want that. And as we said before, you know what? I don't want to make this sound like a Wella Balsam commercial, but if you really enjoy us and you know other Beatle people or even music people who would enjoy listening to us, because a lot of people listen at going to work, on a bike ride, please go out and tell your friends and let them tell friends too, because we have a nice size audience all over the world, but we can only get bigger, and we really appreciate all our listeners.
Yeah, so thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.
Fab4Free4All was edited and produced by Tony Chiguardo at Word of Mouth Studios in Westbury, New York. The opening and closing theme is Not Alone by Barry Waller. Be sure to visit our website at www.fab4free4all.com.